Once upon a time, in a big bright village, lived a man named Amadi. Amadi had a wife named Amma. Amma was very kind and loved by everyone in the village. But one night, something sad happened. Amma disappeared, and no one could find her anywhere. The villagers searched everywhere. They looked behind the big trees, near the river, and under the bushes. They called her name, Amma, Amma, but she did not come back. Everyone was very worried. After many days, the villagers thought that Amma must have died because they could not find her anywhere. They were very sad and missed her a lot. They talked about her sweet smile and how she used to make the tastiest yam porridge. They said, "We will remember Amma forever." And they were sad, thinking she was not with them anymore. But Amadi had a secret, a very big secret. He knew where Amma was. Amma had not really gone to the stars. Because of this, Amadi acted sad in front of the villagers. But inside, he was thinking about marrying another lady, Amma's friend. He didn't tell anyone his secret, not even his best friend. Every night he looked at the stars and felt a little scared because he knew the truth about where Amma was. And that's how the big secret stayed with Amadi, while the village thought Amma had disappeared forever. Back in the present, Amadi tries to live like everything is normal. He laughs with the villagers, he works in his farm, but inside he feels very scared and sad. When he is alone, he hears whispers in the wind that sound like Amma's voice. Sometimes at night, he dreams that Amma comes back looking sad and asking, "Why Amadi?" Even though Amadi wants to forget and marry the other lady, the memory of that night under the mango tree keeps haunting him. He walks by the backyard and feels like the ground there is different, heavier somehow. Amadi knows he should feel happy about his new plans. But the secret of what he did to Amma makes his heart feel like a stone. He wonders if he will ever feel light and happy again, or if the whisper of the leaves will always be telling Amma's story. In the village, things started to feel a little strange. At night, the wind seemed to howl louder than before, and sometimes Amadi's doors would slam shut even when there was no breeze. The big mango tree, under which Amadi and Amma used to sit, began to drop its mangoes before they were ripe, thudding heavily onto the ground. The villagers started whispering to each other. "Do you feel it? The chill in the air when you walk past Amadi's house," they'd say. "Maybe it's Amma's spirit. Maybe she's not at peace." They talked about how spirits sometimes come back if they had something left unsaid or undone. But Amadi, he didn't want to believe in these whispers. "It's just the wind, just the old tree," he would say loudly, laughing a little too hard. He tried to ignore the goosebumps on his arms whenever he was home alone, telling himself it was all silly superstition. Instead of worrying about the strange happenings, Amadi focused on Mai, Amma's friend. Mai was gentle and kind, with a smile that reminded him a little of Amma. He started visiting Mai, bringing her gifts of yams and honey. He'd sit with her, trying to weave his charm, hoping she'd be his wife. But every time he talked to Mai, a gust of wind would blow, rustling the leaves and making the curtains dance. And at night, the strange sounds around his house grew louder, like someone was whispering his name. It seemed the more he ignored the signs, the stronger they returned, as if they were trying to tell him something important. Even so, Amadi kept dismissing these signs, focusing all his smiles and sweet words on Mai. But deep down, a fear began to grow inside him, a fear that maybe the village whispers were right. Maybe Amma's spirit really was stirring, and maybe, just maybe, it wanted justice. One bright morning, when the sun painted the sky a soft orange, Amadi decided it was time to ask Mai to marry him. He put on his best shirt, the one with patterns of the great river, and combed his hair until it lay smooth against his head. In his hand, he held a small, woven basket filled with the sweetest oranges from his garden, his heart fluttering like a caged bird. Mai was tending to her flower garden when Amadi arrived. Her hands were deep in the earth, and her face lit up with a warm smile as Amadi approached. But when he mentioned marriage, her smile faltered, and she paused, her hands still in the soil. Amadi, Mai began, her voice trailing off as she looked around, as if searching for the right words carried by the wind. I loved Amma very much. She was like a sister to me. It feels too soon, and it feels strange without her. Amadi nodded, trying to mask the flicker of worry in his eyes. I understand, Mai, but life must go on, and we find happiness where we can, he said, his voice almost convincing. As they spoke, a cold breeze swept through the garden, chilling their bones despite the morning sun. Mai shivered and looked around, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. The flowers in her garden swayed violently as if in disapproval, though there was hardly any wind to explain it. Did you feel that? Mai whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. It's just a chilly morning, Amadi said quickly, too quickly, as he glanced nervously around, half expecting to see Amma standing there. He reached out to take Mai's hand, but just as their fingers were about to touch, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. A single, beautiful flower from Amma's favorite bush suddenly wilted and died right before their eyes. Mai pulled her hand back, her heart racing. Amadi, I need some time to think about this. Please, she stammered, her loyalty to Amma tangling her feelings like the vines in her garden. Amadi left Mai's house with a heavy heart, the basket of oranges still in his hand, untouched and unwanted. As he walked back to his house, the air felt denser, and the whispers of the village seemed to follow him, murmuring about spirits and unsettled deaths. That night, as Amadi tried to sleep, the image of the wilted flower haunted him. The house creaked and groaned as if bearing the weight of an unseen presence. Amadi tossed and turned, his mind a turmoil of regret and fear. It seemed the more he tried to move forward, the stronger the past clung to him, reminding him of the grave secret buried just outside his window. One morning, after a night filled with uneasy dreams, Amadi decided he could no longer bear the strange happenings and the heavy guilt alone. He walked to the edge of the village where an old wise woman lived. Her hut was small, surrounded by curious herbs and whispering trees. The villagers said she could speak to spirits and uncover deep secrets. As Amadi approached, the wise woman was sitting outside her hut, her eyes closed as if she was listening to the wind. Without opening her eyes, she spoke. I've been expecting you, Amadi. Amadi felt a shiver run down his spine. He sat down across from her, the dirt cool beneath his feet. I need your help, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. There are strange things happening around my home. I hear whispers and things move on their own. The wise woman opened her eyes, looking directly into Amadi's, with a gaze that seemed to see right through him. The spirits are restless, she said slowly. They speak of darkness, and their heart burdened with guilt. Amadi's heart pounded louder, fear mixing with his desperation. How do I make it stop? How do I bring peace back to my home? He asked, hoping for a simple solution. The wise woman sighed, her voice heavy with the weight of her knowledge. The only way to calm the spirits is to confess your sins. The truth must come out to heal the wounds you have caused. Atas quenchtasi insi. Amadi's breath caught in his throat. Confess. He couldn't possibly reveal what he had done to Amma. The consequences would be unimaginable. He would lose everything, his respect, his status in the village, and maybe even his freedom. No, there must be another way. Can't you do a ritual or give me an amulet? Amadi pleaded, desperation coloring his voice. The wise woman shook her head, her expression somber. Some disturbances are beyond the help of herbs and charms. Your spirit is tied to the deed you have hidden. Unless you release that truth, there will be no peace for you or the spirit that haunts you. Amadi stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the dirt. No, I cannot, he muttered, more to himself than to the wise woman. As he turned to leave, the wise woman called out, Be warned, Amadi. Secrets buried in darkness have a way of coming to light. It is better to be the one who reveals them than the one who is revealed. Amadi walked back to the village, the wise woman's words echoing in his mind. With each step, his fear grew. He looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see Amma's spirit following him, her eyes sad and accusing. That night, as the wind howled around his hut, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, Amadi knew the wise woman was right, but still, he couldn't bring himself to confess. He lay in bed, watching the moonlight dance across the floor, and felt the weight of his secret suffocating him like a thick blanket. He wondered how long he could endure this haunted life, and what it would cost him in the end. Despite the wise woman's warning and the restless nights, Amadi decided to push forward with his plans to marry Mai. He thought perhaps marrying her might somehow settle the disturbances. With a heavy heart, he began the preparations for the wedding, hoping to distract himself from the eerie happenings around his home. The village buzzed with the news of the upcoming wedding. Tents were erected, and colorful cloths were hung. The villagers, excited about the celebration, lent their hands to help. But the air around Amadi's house felt thick and cold, even on sunny days. As the preparations progressed, the disturbances grew more intense. One evening, as Amadi was discussing the wedding feast with Mai in his living room, a cold wind swept through the house, extinguishing the lamps. In the sudden darkness, both Amadi and Mai saw the silhouette of a woman standing at the window. The figure looked eerily like Amma, her eyes sad and her presence chilling. When Amadi blinked, the vision was gone, but Mai had seen it too. Was that Amma? Mai whispered, her voice trembling with fear. It was just a shadow, Mai, nothing more, Amadi replied quickly, his voice unconvincing even to his own ears. But Mai couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She started to ask more questions. Amadi, tell me the truth. What really happened to Amma? Everyone says she just disappeared. But now I'm not so sure. Amadi felt trapped, his secret burning a hole in his chest. He avoided Mai's eyes, fumbling with his words. Amma left Mai. She just left one night. I don't know where she went, but the lies felt hollow, and Mai sensed it. Her sleep became haunted by dreams of Amma calling out to her, begging to be found. The more she pressed Amadi for answers, the more evasive he became, and the more suspicious Mai grew. The wedding day drew closer, and the supernatural incidents only intensified. Cooking pots would clatter to the ground without being touched, and the sound of somber singing would drift through the village at night. The villagers began to talk in hushed tones, their excitement about the wedding turning into concern. One afternoon, as Mai was arranging flowers in the wedding area, she saw Ama's reflection in a mirror. Ama's image was clear and sorrowful, her mouth moving as if trying to speak to Mai. Frozen with horror, Mai watched as the reflection pointed towards the backyard, towards the spot where Ama had loved to garden. Shaken, Mai confronted Amadi again, this time more forcefully. I saw her, Amadi. Ama was in the mirror. She was pointing to the backyard. Please, for the love of the spirits, tell me what happened to her. Amadi, seeing the fear and determination in Mai's eyes, knew he could no longer keep the truth buried. The guilt, the hauntings, and now Mai's insistence were too much to bear. He felt the weight of his actions closing in, suffocating him. Under the shadow of the big mango tree, the same tree under which he had once shared so many happy moments with Ama, Amadi finally broke down. With tears streaming down his face, he confessed everything to Mai. He told her about the argument, about his selfish desire to remarry, and about the dreadful night he buried Ama alive just to keep her quiet. One night, when the moon was just a silver sliver in the sky, Amadi and Ama were sitting under the big mango tree in their backyard. The air was quiet, and the only sound was the rustle of leaves. Amadi looked at Ama and said, Ama, I want to marry another wife, a lady from the next village. Ama was very surprised and sad. She loved Amadi very much and thought they were happy together. No, Amadi, Ama said softly. You should not marry another wife. We promised to always be there for each other, just us two. Amadi didn't like Ama's words. He got very angry. No, Ama, I will do what I want, he shouted. But Ama stood up and said, I cannot let you do this, Amadi. It's not right. That night, Amadi made a very bad choice. While Ama was asleep, he quietly took her to a little spot in the backyard. He thought, if Ama cannot agree, then I must keep her quiet forever. And so he buried her there, where the shadows were long and dark. Ama couldn't say no anymore. Mai listened, horror-struck and heartbroken. The world seemed to spin around her as she grappled with the monstrous truth about the man she was about to marry. As the truth came out, the air felt lighter, but the damage was done. The wedding preparations, once filled with joy, were now overshadowed by a tragic truth that changed everything. After hearing Amadi's shocking confession, Mai felt as if the ground beneath her had shattered. With tears in her eyes and a heart heavy with grief for her friend Ama, she stumbled away from Amadi, her mind racing with horror and disbelief. Amadi watched helplessly as Mai fled, her figure disappearing among the trees. The weight of his sins felt heavier than ever, crushing him with guilt and fear. He knew that once Mai told the villagers what he had done, his life in the village would be over. He would be shunned, despised, and possibly even punished by the community's laws. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the village, Amadi sat alone in his hut, wrestling with his thoughts. The idea of fleeing the village crossed his mind. He could leave under the cover of night, find a new place, and start anew where no one knew of his terrible deed. But as he packed some belongings, he realized how futile the idea was. He was too entangled in his lies, too rooted in his life here. Where could he go that his guilt wouldn't follow him? The haunting visions of Ama and the eerie disturbances at home seemed to grow more intense, as if confirming that he couldn't just run from his past. Every creak of his hut, every whisper of the wind sounded like accusations, reminding him of the grave in his backyard. Desperate and cornered, Amadi felt a surge of panic. He stopped packing and thought about facing the villagers' wrath. Could he endure their judgment, their scorn? He imagined their angry faces, the way they would look at him, not as a neighbor, but as a monster. In a moment of sheer desperation, Amadi considered one last plan to save himself. He thought of denying everything, of claiming Mai was lying or mistaken in her grief. But as he played out the lies in his mind, he realized how empty and hopeless they sounded. Mai had known Amma too well. She would never make up such a story. And deep down, Amadi knew he couldn't live with more lies, more deception. The truth, however dark, was out now, and there was no way to bury it again. As night enveloped the village, Amadi sat in his darkened hut, the sounds of the night mocking his fear. He realized that all he could do now was wait for the dawn and for Mai to reveal his secret. The thought terrified him, but part of him also felt a strange relief. Soon, the burden of his secret might be lifted, for better or for worse. With a heavy heart, Amadi spent the night awake, waiting for the first light of morning and the confrontation that would inevitably come. He knew that the next day would likely change his life forever, and he braced himself for the judgment of the villagers, the real consequences of his unforgivable actions. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, the village awoke to a day that would be etched in its history forever. Mai, having spent a restless night tormented by grief and anger, gathered her courage and walked towards the center of the village. Her steps were determined, her resolve to seek justice for her friend firm and unyielding. Gathering the villagers around the old banyan tree, where gatherings and decisions of importance were traditionally held, Mai's voice trembled as she recounted the horrific confession that Amadi had made. Her words fell like heavy stones into the silence of the morning, each revelation more shocking than the last. The villagers listened, their initial disbelief turning into horror and then fiery anger. As Mai spoke of the backyard where Amma was buried, a murmur rose among the crowd. The horror of such a betrayal by one of their own left them enraged and crying for justice. Led by the village shaman, a wise and revered figure, the villagers marched to Amadi's house, their faces set in grim lines, their hearts heavy with betrayal. Amadi watched from his doorway, his face pale, knowing there was no escape from the truth. His eyes, full of fear, met Mai's, full of accusation, as the villagers began to dig in the backyard. It didn't take long. Soon, a shovel clinked against something solid, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. As they cleared the dirt, the remains of Amma were revealed, her clothing tattered but recognizable, her bones a stark, grim testament to her fate. The village shaman stepped forward, his face somber as he addressed the crowd. "This is a dark day for us," he began, his voice echoing with both sorrow and authority. "Amma was one of us, and she was wronged. We cannot let her spirit wander in unrest. Justice must be served for her, for us." The villagers nodded, their faces hardened by the need for justice. Discussions arose on what should be done. While some cried for immediate punishment, the shaman advised a careful consideration, reminding them of the laws of the land and the importance of a just response. Amadi was taken to a holding area, watched over by the village elders, as the shaman consulted with the village council. It was decided that the authorities would be called to handle the matter officially, ensuring that justice was not only done, but seen to be done in accordance with the law. Throughout, the shaman performed rituals to appease Amma's spirit, asking for her forgiveness and for peace to return to the village. Incense burned, Prayers were chanted and offerings were made, all part of the solemn promise to right the wrongs that had been done. The day wore on, heavy with the weight of truth and the pursuit of justice. The villagers, united in their shock and grief, supported each other, reaffirming the bonds of their community, shaken but resilient in the face of betrayal. As the sun set on the village, a sense of solemnity settled over the homes. They had faced a terrible truth that day, but in their commitment to justice, they found a renewed strength, a reaffirmation of their values and their unity. Ama's spirit, they hoped, could now find peace, and with it, the village could begin to heal from the wounds of betrayal. The day of the Ritual of Atonement arrived, marked by a somber mood that hung over the village like a thick fog. The villagers, dressed in white as a symbol of purity and renewal, gathered around the old banyan tree once again. This time, the gathering was to heal, to cleanse the pain that had seeped into their lives. The shaman, adorned in his ceremonial robes, prepared the ritual space with sacred herbs and symbols drawn in the earth around the tree. The air was filled with the scent of burning sage, and soft mournful chants began to rise among the villagers, their voices weaving a tapestry of sorrow and hope. At the center of the gathering, under the watchful eyes of the community, stood Amadi. His face was gaunt, the weight of his guilt etching deep lines into his skin. As the shaman approached him, he handed Amadi a small bowl of water mixed with herbs, symbolizing purification. The shaman spoke in a clear, resonant voice. Today, we gather not only to seek justice, but to restore peace to our community and to the spirit of Ama, who was wronged. Let the truth be spoken here, and let the heart that harbors guilt be cleansed. Turning to Amadi, the shaman continued, "Speak your truth, confess your deeds, and ask for forgiveness from Ama's spirit and from your community." With trembling hands, Amadi took the bowl and drank the bitter water, a symbol of his willingness to cleanse his soul. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. "I have wronged Ama, a woman who was my wife, whom I promised to protect and cherish. In a moment of selfishness, I took her life because she stood in the way of my desires. I buried her in our backyard, hiding my crime from all of you." The villagers listened, their faces a mixture of horror, sadness, and compassion. Tears flowed freely among them as the weight of Amadi's confession settled in their hearts. "I am deeply sorry for the pain I have caused to Ama, to Mai, to all of you." Amadi continued, his voice breaking. "I seek forgiveness, though I know I may not deserve it." The shaman then led the villagers in a chant, asking for the spirits to cleanse Amadi and to bring peace to Ama's spirit. He instructed the villagers to pass around a feather, each person holding it as they said a prayer for healing and forgiveness. As the feather passed from hand to hand, each villager added their voice to the ritual, their words a powerful force for healing. When the feather returned to the shaman, he placed it in a clay pot, which he then buried under the banyan tree, symbolizing the burial of past wrongs and the planting of new beginnings. Finally, the shaman asked everyone to join hands, forming a circle around the tree. "Let this circle be a symbol of our unity and our commitment to peace and justice," he said. "May we move forward as a community, stronger and wiser from our trials." As the ritual concluded, the villagers felt a subtle shift in the air, a lightness, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Though the pain of the past could not be erased, the ritual of atonement brought a sense of closure and a hope for renewal. Amadi stood quietly, the reality of his confession and the forgiveness offered by his community washing over him. He knew his journey of atonement was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps one day he could find peace within himself as well. As in the days following the ritual of atonement, the village slowly began to heal, but the memory of what had happened remained fresh in the minds of all. Amadi, having confessed his grievous actions, was now a figure of solemn isolation. The community, while having forgiven him in the ritual, could not forget the atrocity he had committed. As a result, Amadi was shunned and required to live on the outskirts of the village, separated from the daily lives and joys of his neighbors. Amadi's hut, once filled with the laughter of his wife, now stood as a somber reminder of his deeds. He spent his days in solitude, tending to a small garden that he had started in an attempt to soothe his troubled mind. Yet, the plants and flowers, though they bloomed, could not erase the haunting memories of his past actions. He often paused, looking at the quiet earth, reminded of the grave he had once dug in his backyard. The villagers, for their part, worked to restore peace and ensure that such a tragedy would never again disturb their community. They established a council to address grievances and conflicts, a move inspired by the collective resolve to protect every member without resorting to secrecy or silence. They also began to honor Ama's memory annually, planting flowers and trees in a new community garden named after her, turning the site of her burial into a place of beauty and reflection. The annual remembrance became a vital part of the village's life, not only to honor Ama, but also as a lesson to all about the value of life and the importance of speaking out against wrongdoing. It was a time for the community to come together, reaffirm their bonds, and teach their children the importance of justice and compassion. Amadi, watching from a distance, was never a part of these gatherings. His presence was a reminder of the past the villagers wanted to move beyond. Yet he was not forgotten. The shaman would occasionally visit him, providing counsel and ensuring he was not neglected, for the community believed in justice tempered with mercy. As the years passed, Amadi grew older and frailer, his life a shadow of what it might have been. The isolation weighed heavily on him, each day a mirror reflecting his grave mistake. Yet, through his solitude, he found a certain clarity. He understood the depth of his wrongdoings and learned, albeit too late, the true cost of his actions, not just to himself but to everyone around him. The story of Amadi and Ama, tinged with sorrow and regret, became a cautionary tale told in hushed tones by the elders, and a stark lesson for the young. It served as a powerful reminder of the fragile nature of trust and the profound consequences of betraying it. In this way, the village found its peace, weaving together the threads of loss and forgiveness into a tapestry of strengthened community bonds. Ama's memory, enshrined in blossoms and the shade of new trees, whispered reminders of resilience and renewal to all who walked the paths of the garden bearing her name. As for Amadi, his days ended quietly, a man shaped and shattered by his own deeds. His story, a painful chapter in the village's history, reminded all who remembered it that redemption is sometimes found not in the forgiveness of others, but in the solemn acknowledgement of one's own faults and the unending journey towards making amends, however solitary that path might be. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.